Let me, before we start, can you take it off again for a second? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Can you take it off for a second?
Okay, yes.
Let's have to do something.
Take it off for a second. Stop sharing. My hands are shaking. It's like, oh my God.
Just for a second.
Okay.
Okay. So now we can start our next little teaching on the Lam Rim. Okie doke, off you go.
Yes.
Good. Share now. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Share now. Let's see. I just had it here. Okay. Can everybody see?
That's good, yes.
Okay. And now me myself too. Oh, no, I can't. I have to chant. I have to offer the mandala.
You're going to lead the prayer, are you?
Oh gosh, I'm so nervous.
Are you the Umze today, Talia? Talia, are you the Umze today?
Yes.
Good, okay. So what Talia is going to do is on the behalf of Laksam and all of the students, she's going to say this. The first one is make this Mandala offering, make the offering of all the things of the universe offering as a request for the teachings. That's what she does. And then I will lead the other prayers. Okay, so if you know the mudra, the Mandala mudra, you do that. And then in your heart, you imagine offering all the most marvelous things to the Buddha as a request for the teachings.
Yes. And I will make the mandala offering in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all transmigratory beings enjoy this pure land. Pure, perfect, pure and holy gurus, from the billowing clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of Dhammakaya, please let fall a rain of profound and extensive Dhamma, upon the earth of those to be subdued exactly as they need. Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kamiyatayami.
Okay, that's wonderful. So now, as usual, we can do these two different thoughts. The first one I'll say in English, and we'll twice then sing it in Tibetan. This second prayer we're saying, what it's saying is, the bottom one, but basically I'm going to say it in my words, spell it out. What we're saying is until we are enlightened, we are going to rely upon the Buddha, his teachings, and then the community of practitioners who are supporting us in our practice, the three jewels, or as Lama Zopa politely puts it, the three rare, sublime ones. So until we're enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. And now the second part is expressing this marvelous altruistic reason or motivation for why we're sitting here together listening to these teachings. It's saying, so by all the virtuous karma that we create, every single second of every thought we have sows a seed in the mind. So by the virtuous karma of the karmic seeds that we put into our mind by listening to these teachings, then we become a Buddha, so that we can be of benefit to all suffering sentient beings. That's what we're saying. That's the first one. So two more times in Tibetan. Sangye charang tsoke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. Sangye charang tsoke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. Okay. So, all right. So let me look at the calendar. So today we've got 1, 2, 3. So I've got six more for Zurich. That's another topic, is it?
Yes. So for this course for Lam Rim, there are 3 more, including today. So
3
after
more,
today, 2 more.
11th, 18th, and 25th. And then we have April 1, 8, 15, and 22 on another topic, yeah?
Yes, on purification.
Okay, good, brilliant. Okay, so good. So now we're into university. Okay, so far we've done junior school and high school, and now we're into university. So what that means is, so far we've started at the very beginning. We began with thinking about the which is a crucial one for us in the modern world, where we have the materialist view that thinks the mind is the brain. We do have a brain. Buddha's not arguing, but Buddha's view about what mind is radically different. So for us to start the whole path, it's important. Like Lama Tsongkhapa, when he first started teaching modern people, all the Western hippies in the early 70s. It was he needed to tell us about the nature of the mind. So the mind is not physical. The mind is not the handiwork of mummy or daddy or creator. The mind does not begin in the mother's womb, which is what we tend to think. The mind is beginningless and endless. In fact, it's the product of cause and effect. It's not physical. So these are the things we need to think about and contemplate and kind of, at least at the beginning, hypothesize. Because if we don't get this clear, the whole of Buddhism just doesn't work. It's absurd. The concept of karma is meaningless if there's no mind from the past. All the realms of existence have no meaning if the mind is the brain. Clearly, it's absurd. It's all nonsense. So we have to hypothesize this point that the mind is not physical. It goes to much more subtle levels. It's got this marvelous potential for buddhahood. It's not the handiwork of mummy, daddy, or creator. It's not a function of the brain. All of these things. We have to get that very clear. So then we take the point that Atisha started with, and when he first wrote his little text that Tsongkhapa in the 14th century uses as his basis for all the commentary on this Lam Rim, this gradual path. This very first point is like a preliminary contemplation to prime our minds into even wanting to bother to enter into the path to enlightenment. And that is, Atisha gets us to think about the preciousness of this life. He has listed in about 18 different points. I didn't go into each one in detail. I just made the general point that if we recognize how fortunate we are and how rare it is, if we look at all the beings in the universe, even if we look at all the beings on the human planet, forget the billions and trillions of other sentient beings, we're going to see it's like astonishing. It's like we won the biggest lottery in the universe, except it's not a lottery. It's the result of our own hard work. It's a miracle, but it's the result of our own hard work that we've got all these conditions of this reasonable, perfect human rebirth. And what that means is not only does the human body, not only, but not only reasonable mind, reasonable intelligence, and reasonable sanity, but also good conditions, all of which come together. And these are the resources we need badly in order to want to continue to want to do something about it. So the first point here is not to want to waste these resources, this resource called a human body, and all the resources we have in this human life. We don't think of our life like that. We tend to take it for granted. Aren't I lucky, we think, or indeed, aren't I unlucky, we think, as if someone else did it to us. No. This is astonishing. We don't. So the key point here is the action point upon thinking about and contemplating this precious human rebirth by looking at it very clearly and comparing. It's like doing some market research. It's like checking up, and you got to realize you're part of like the 0.1%, not rich but fortunate. So then the conclusion is I mustn't waste it. I mustn't waste it. So what it means is we have to reinterpret what this human life is. We have an interpretation now that it's just, someone else made me. It's just life's a drag. I'm boring. I'm fat. I'm ugly. Life is useless. No wonder we all get depressed, because we can't see any value. In other words, we don't see the value of this life. This is really the point here. And this is a curious point. So we don't think like this, So I will use the analogy of money. It's such a brilliant example. If you look at it, even just a €100 note or 100, what do you have in Switzerland? Francs, yeah, Swiss francs or dollars or whatever you want. Look at it. What it is in its nature. It's a piece of paper or maybe plastic, isn't it? It's quite small. It's got some, Switzerland's got some fairly nice art. You've got some quite well-designed money. Most money is pretty ugly looking. But in its nature, it's a piece of paper with some pictures on it and a number in the corner. Think about it. It's a really good analogy. On the face of it, that's what it is. If you've never heard of the concept of money, if you've never heard of the concept that that piece of paper represents something, is a resource, that if you give it to somebody, according to the number in the corner, they'll give you something of that value. So it's quite a powerful concept. But on the face of it, if you've never heard of this concept, you just look at it, and especially if it's, everyone else has been using it. Apparently money is so dirty. It's got drugs, cocaine, heroin, pee, caca on it. Normally if you saw a piece of paper on the ground that's all dirty and crumpled, you'd never pick it up. You'd throw it in the bin. But because it's what we call money, it's a good analogy. You go, that's valuable. I want that. So you don't see it on face. You don't take it on face value. People don't care how dirty it is. They're going to happily accept it. And if it's 100, they'll give you €100, 100 francs worth of stuff. So that's a very powerful concept. This is also proving emptiness. So now think of that as the analogy for our life. All we do is we look in the mirror and we see this fat old body, or a thin old body, or a thin young body, whatever it might be, but we don't see it as valuable. I mean, please hear the words. We certainly don't think it as a result of any past virtue. We don't think that we've created it. That's like a weird idea. But even on the face of it, we don't see it as valuable. And then because we're overwhelmed by misery and depression and anxiety and life is boring, I haven't got enough of this. So we just sit here like a big lump of misery, you know. In other words, you've got all this money, you've got all these frank notes, and all you do is look how dirty it is. All you do is look how ugly the art is. All you do is look at it on face value. That's exactly what we're doing with this human rebirth. We don't take it, we just take it for granted. So we don't use it, we waste it. So it's like you got all these frank notes, you know, and you just leave them there. How boring, that boring art. You know, they're repetitive. All the 50s got the same picture. All the 5s got the same picture. It's kind of boring. If you take it on face value, that's exactly what we're doing with our human life. So we completely waste it. We tip it down the toilet. In other words, we don't see it as a resource. That's exactly what money is. Intrinsically, you know, actually what it is a piece of paper. You're right. But when you know what it means and the value we give it, that it's a resource that you can get marvelous things for. That's exactly the analogy here, as corny as it sounds to us. So what can you do with this marvelous resource? Well, you can go to junior school and you can, you know, stop harming others and stop the future suffering, and guaranteed you get at least 100%, at least you can get more of the same. You can get 100 francs worth for 100 francs by controlling your body and speech in junior school. So you get at least another human body. You can go further. You can you know, multiply your result, and you can actually go to high school and you can actually get rid of attachment and give up all the nonsense and give up samsara. And you can do even more. You can become a Buddha. So of course it's abstract to us. Of course it sounds kind of cute, but this is the point. A teacher wants us to see it's not the action point with his very first contemplation is not to waste this precious life. That won't happen. You won't think that until you think about it. You got to think about it. Then conclude, I do not want to waste this precious human life. Then you enter into junior school, entry-level grade 1 junior school practice. And now a teacher gets us to, or Tsongkhapa gets us to think of he continues to prime our minds to, we're not yet starting to practice. We're getting ready to want to practice. So as we've discussed, the very next point, the first point in junior school, the first scope of the Lam Rim, is to think about impermanence. So this especially in particular death. So this increases a teacher's agenda is to increase our wake-up call, to increase the wake-up call, not to waste this precious life. Because now we start to contemplate that actually it's not just precious, but it's fragile and it will definitely end, and you haven't got a clue when. So in other words, the money can run out at any minute. So you don't waste it. You don't waste it. That's the key point. So it increases our wish not to waste this life, because it will end at any moment. Then he gets us to then think about the likely possibilities of types of rebirth, which of course are taken as a given in Eastern culture. This is brand new for us again, if we're thinking from the modern perspective of being Christians or materialists or Muslims, Muslims as well. It's a brand new idea to think that you're going to get reborn, not just in heaven or hell, which is the Muslims and Christians think, but that you be reborn at all. If you're a materialist, is a brand new idea, and that you're in charge of this process. So here, the point is to increase our wake-up call by thinking about the lower realms of rebirth, where here we try to get some sense of Buddha's view of the broader picture of the entire universe and all these different realms of existence. But the key point here is Tsongkhapa gets us to think about the likely possibility of being reborn in suffering realms. Of course, this is abstract for us, extremely hard for us to think about. So that means we try to see the suffering. So as I think we use the example, at least animals, we can see them. We can't see hell beings and spirits and so on, but we can see animals, at least some of them. So it's very hard for us to think that they're suffering, not according to the view that we have in the modern world. We always think, animals are luckier than humans. Animals are better than humans. The commonest thing was all our attachment to animals these days. Unbelievable attachment to our pussycats and doggy woggies. Unbelievable attachment. It's kind of grotesque. Not love, attachment. We think they're so special. We prefer them to humans. The commonest thing people say is they prefer their dogs to humans, So we have a fantasy of what a dog is. And this is a shocking, shocking, shocking point. Forget about the gross suffering of animals. It's pretty evident Who would want to be born as a, as a domestic animal, to be treated like monster? I mean, look at the monstrous suffering, the gross suffering of animals, misused by humans for food, for example. Forget that level of suffering. Lama Zopa has said, I remember one friend said to me, I always quote this, if we could just for a moment have a direct experience of the suffering of the mind of our little dog, just our little precious dog, whom we think is so happy and so gorgeous and so content. It shows the Buddhist view, it shows how profoundly ignorant we are. Rinpoche said, if we could just for a moment have a direct experience of the mind of our little dog, their mental suffering would be so unbearable. We wouldn't want to waste another precious second of this precious human life. This is very shocking to us. This is not what we observe. So this clearly is coming from the mind of a person who sees the minds of beings, which is clairvoyance. This is very sobering. So we do not want to be born animal. Thank you very much. Not to mention the others. So then the conclusion here is, the action point is, what can I do about this? How can I prevent this kind of future suffering? Thank you very much. Because I will die. I don't know when it's going to be. Then this leads us to the next point. Well, whom can I turn to? So we find someone to rely upon to give us methods to prevent this kind of suffering. But more broadly, any kind of suffering, which includes the suffering we would have even as a human. The suffering of change, all the things that happen, the suffering of suffering and so on. So here, the next point is we then think about the Buddha and we decide we're going to rely upon the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. So we talked about refuge, etc., etc., etc. It's like turning to the doctor. You hear about the likely possibility of terrible suffering of getting cancer. So you think, well, whom can I turn to? Who can give me methods to stop this kind of suffering? So Buddha's our doctor. Then now we start, next point, culmination of junior school, first scope of practice, is now we start to actually practice. This is Buddha up until this point. Tsongkhapa, using a tisha based on Buddhist teachings, is leading us step by step with each of these contemplations, priming our mind to get to the point where we have no choice but only to want to begin to practice. Here we start taking the medicine. This is abiding by the laws of karma. So this is the essence of the whole junior school level of practice, the first scope. Abide by the laws of karma. Why? Because as far as Buddha's observed, this is the law that runs the universe. The law within which all minds of all the trillions of sentient beings, within the law within which our minds run, our minds and lives, think of it this way. We're our own creators, as His Holiness says. So we need to learn the nuts and bolts of the law of karma. And the fundamental core, the basic principle here, Buddha exhorts us to not kill, not steal, not lie, etc. About 10 little points. Why? We should ask him why. If you ask Jesus, because he tells us similar things, why should I not kill, Jesus? He says, because God says so. Because God's your creator. He's the boss. So a sin by definition is doing what God said not to do. Not for the Buddha. Buddha's not a boss. He is not a creator. As far as he's concerned, this is natural law. And he has observed with his mind that harming others is what causes me future suffering. So the logic behind why Buddha would exhort us not to harm others is very simple. It's very clear. It's for your own benefit. Because, honey child, doing the action of killing and stealing and lying and bad-mouthing and jumping on the wrong partners, etc., 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 will sow seeds in your mind. This is just what the natural law of karma is, which will ripen in the future as your suffering like that. Not to mention suffering realms of existence. So the whole basis of this level of practice is respect for yourself, because I'm sick of suffering. That's the essence of the law of karma. We discussed all this. And then, of course, we can then start to live in, we can make it more serious, having taken refuge. We can now start to live in the vows of not harming. There are 5 of them. And this is the stupendous level of practice. As Rinpoche says, just being good is not enough. Merely refraining from harming is not enough. It's a good start. By living in vows, Buddha talks about his vows. Vows are so potent that 24 hours a day that you're not killing, not stealing, not lying, you're ticking over virtuous karmic seeds into your bank vaults of virtuous karmic seeds, 24 hours a day. Without vows, it's only when you consciously decide not to kill. It's only when you consciously decide not to lie. When the intention is there, which is the meaning of karma, mental action. It's only when you decide not to do harmful things that you drop a seed in your bank vault. And the seed is not that strong because our motivation is not that strong. Whereas the power of vows is such that every second you're keeping those vows, every second, 24 hours a day, whether you're thinking about it or not, you're ticking over virtuous karmic seeds, putting karmic seeds into your bank vault and purifying your mind, putting atomic bombs under the tendencies of killing, stealing, lying, etc., purifying past karma. This is the essence of the main approach to practice in junior school. So now, having subdued our body, speech, and beginning to subdue our mind to some degree, we now go to the next level of practice, which is now we get to the root of the problem, which is the mind. This is the middle scope of practice, or high school. Having subdued the servants of the delusions, we can now begin to unpack and unravel the delusions themselves, in particular attachment. So the essence of this next level of attachment, suffering, next level of practice, is to unpack and unravel the mind, become intimately familiar with our mind. And the crucial job is to distinguish between the delusions and the virtues. This is the essence of being a Buddhist, which means you need to study the mind. You need to know what it is. And you need to know what the components of the mind are. You need to know what sensory consciousness is. You need to know what mental consciousness is. You need to know how all the delusions are conceptual. You need to know what the virtues are. You need to learn the Buddhist model of the mind. And then do the hard work of being your own therapist through much practice every day, learning to see your mind, watching it like a hawk, lessening the delusions. That's your main emphasis here. Already from this junior school and high school, the first and second scopes of the Lam Rim, you're going to get some intense, the consequence of this, the realizations of this that come from this will be called renunciation. Sounds very forbidding. We don't like thinking of giving up things. So what are you giving up? Well, honey, you're giving up suffering and its causes. Suffering and its causes. So here, especially in the high school level, the middle scope, you're going to learn about the Four Noble Truths, which is Buddha's first presentation of his teachings. There is suffering. There are causes. You can get rid of it. And the way to do it. But particularly also, we went into this, you learn in the middle scope in high school, you learn very much about the structure of samsara, how we technically create samsara. That means we have to understand the difference between these different states of mind. We discuss this. We have to understand, what attachment is, what love is, how can we confuse them. We've got to understand the way we create samsara, the 12 links. I didn't go into the 12 links much, but we described a little bit the technicality, the mechanics of how we create moment by moment, how we create our samsara, We looked at the relationship between pleasant feelings and attachment, and how this is so, because we don't distinguish between these, we are locked in these misconceptions, So now we're ready to move on to, now we've got some sense of renunciation of suffering and its causes. Whose? Mine. This is for your own sake. This is the wisdom wing. This is all about you. Now we move on to the compassion wing. We began that, I think, last week, or whenever we started, I don't remember. So the starting point here, so the next level of practice, the next realization, this first one is from the two scopes. The realization is renunciation of suffering and its causes. The next level of renunciation, the next level of realization is now bodhichitta. So all these there are two main techniques that lead us to the accomplishment of bodhichitta. This outrageous shift in the mind where now I is no longer important and we exist only for others. This is kind of pretty outrageous. It's kind of shocking. There's nothing equivalent in our culture. It sounds like being a saint. And who wants to be a saint? Not everybody. It just sounds very boring to be a saint. Or we don't even think it's possible. You're just kind of born like that. No, this is bodhisattvas. They're like saint. When you make this shift, and that's the main cause of all that. The main cause of bodhicitta is compassion. So the essence of this next level of practice is compassion. It's called the compassion wing, the bodhisattva approach. So there's two different techniques in the Lam Rim. They talk about the 6 causes and 1 effect, or they call it the 7 point something or other. And the second one is called exchanging self for others, a more dramatic, more radical one. Well, this particular approach we've been going through, we started listing them. There are 11. It's a combination of both techniques, the combination of which is bodhichitta. I mean, people spend years and years in meditation doing these 11, little contemplations, each of which leads to the next, and each of which is very precise. We're very vague in our definitions of things, especially when it comes to love and compassion and body. We kind of get them all mixed up and get a bit gooey and sentimental, But each of these is quite a precise step to go through that leads you to the next, the next, the next. It all culminates in bodhicitta. So the first one, which we discussed, which is extremely important to understand, is equanimity. So equanimity is used differently in different stages of your practice, but here it's specifically referring to an attitude that you want to cultivate. It's a recognition that friends, enemies, and strangers, these 3 categories of sentient beings, and there's no 4th category. It's the recognition, when you've got it, the heartfelt recognition that friends, enemies, and strangers are equal in their wish to be happy and not suffer. It's not, just to point out, we often think it's, I want them to be happy and not want to suffer. That's love and compassion. That comes 5 steps later. Equanimity isn't, I want them to be happy equally and want them not to suffer equally. That's not equanimity. That comes 5 steps later. In your email to me, Talia, you said it like that. So actually equanimity, wanting others to be happy, is called love. That's about the 5th or 6th point. Wanting them not to suffer, that's called compassion. That's about the 7th point or the 8th point. They come way later. This first step is very clear. It's the recognition in our mind that the beloved, the mean person, and the boring person, friend, enemy, stranger, it's the recognition that these 3 people themselves want to be happy and don't want to suffer. It's our equanimity is the recognition of that fact. So from now on, we will gradually, incrementally practice these little different steps that will lead us to want them to be happy equally and to want them to not want to suffer equally. That's it. That's what is so precise. Each of these steps is so precise. But as soon as we talk about love and compassion and meditating on love and compassion, we get all kind of gooey, it's all very vague. It's really precise. Each step leads to the next. So it's the recognition, and this is intense. This is extremely hard already. It's like a joke to say when you look at this. Like I said, you've got. Let's say you're a grandma, and you've got your beloved, precious grandchild, and he's playing, and let's say she's playing with a smelly kid next door who's in the enemy category. You don't like him at all. He's mean and nasty, and you don't like him. You have aversion for him. And then there's the one that you've never met before, who's the stranger. So these 3 kids, one is your beloved, one's a smelly and ugly as far as you're concerned, and one is boring because they're the stranger. You don't know anything about them, so you're indifferent. This is a typical example in daily life, how you would apply, this attitude of equanimity. Where once you've understood what it is. And the equanimity is the recognition, just that fact, leave it right there. The recognition, oh my God, they equally want to be happy. There's no difference. They equally want to not suffer. There's no difference. That is really hard to get. We don't believe that. We don't believe that for 1 second. And our problem is too, this is the point. Let's say, you say to yourself, well, Robina, that smelly kid who is mean, he might be mean and he might be nasty. We're not saying he's not nasty and mean. He might be. He might be a little psychopathic kid. He might be. People are born psychopaths. You don't get turned into one. We all think children are innocent babies. It's so naive. Hitler didn't get turned into a monster by his little mummy. I mean, don't you blame Hitler's mummy, for God's sake. He brought his own rubbish with him. We bring our goodness with us. So there's that smelly kid who lies and is mean and nasty. It might be true. Whom you have aversion for. They're 2 separate things there. They're 2 separate things. One is his qualities and one is how you see him. We think they're the same. No. There's your little saintly grandchild who you think is gorgeous and divine. There's a smelly kid who can't stand, and there's a new kid who's boring and different. You've never met him before. So there's an enemy, there's a friend, and a stranger there. So instantaneously, because we have attachment, and because we have aversion, and because we have ignorance, we see these three people in a completely different way. This is obvious. This is the entire universe. This is happening every second of the day. All the time we're doing it. We're seeing the entire universe through the lenses of our needs. Think of it. This is attachment running the show. So we're seeing everybody through the lenses of our needs, which is to say, if a person fulfills my needs, like say the beautiful grandchild, she's totally divine and gorgeous, she's my grandchild, she's such a saint, then because she fulfills my attachments and needs, I think she's gorgeous. So therefore I want her to be happy, which is called love. Then I see the smelly kid next door who doesn't fulfill my needs. In fact, who consciously, no, but actively, proactively doesn't fulfill my needs. He makes me unhappy. So then I think he's an enemy and I call him ugly because aversion is in my mind. And then the third one does neither. So how do I feel? I couldn't care less. Tomorrow I won't even remember his name. This is how we see the universe, friends, enemies, and strangers. And it's attachment, aversion, and ignorance running the show. We've been looking at that ever since high school. We've been looking at the mind. Now we look at these three in relation to sentient beings. So this equanimity is a specific view that takes a lot of clarity, a lot of analysis to get clear. That friend, enemy, and stranger, my friend, my enemy, my stranger, three people that I see through the lenses of my needs. One who fulfills them, one who that proactively doesn't fulfill them, and then one that does neither. That's the universe, baby. Monkeys, dogs, humans, everybody does it automatically. We don't even question it. So to hear that they are equal from this one point of view, they all yearn to be happy and yearn not to suffer. We hear it, but to think it's true. What do you mean that smelly kid wants to be happy? And you look at what we would say, he doesn't deserve it. Look what he does to people. That's how we feel. We see the pedophiles and the monsters and the bad politicians and the evil people. And there are evil people out there. There are people who are suffering terribly, who are harming others. That's a fact. So the logic we have, and this proves how we have attachment, the first thing we'll say is, what do they mean? What do you mean they want to be happy? The reason we say it is this is the next step. They don't deserve it. That's how we see the world. So who's the person who deserves you to want them to be happy? Is only the person who makes you happy. It shows how self-centered we are. We should be shocked by this. This is the type of analysis we need to do. But this is not the point here. We're trying to get ourselves out of the equation. That's the point. Nothing to do with you, these three people. Back off. Get yourself out of it. We're trying to see them as three separate people. We're trying to get past their saintliness and their monstrousness. That's not the issue here. This is not the issue. Yes, people harm others. Yes, people are kind. That's not the issue. We're trying to get past all of that and get into the bare bones of these three people and see that they are equal from this one point of view. They each are driven by the wish to be happy. They are each driven by the wish not to suffer. That's what is the universal truth for every being. You can almost base all of Buddha's teachings on that. We're trying to see that fact. This is intense. This is intense to see this and have confidence in the truth of it. That's equanimity. And you try to apply it every day. A million times a day, you'll rather favor your beloved and be mean to the other person. You know, I mean, when I was flying in airplanes, I haven't flown in an airplane for quite a while. I've been to the same place for like 9 months. So I think it's the longest I've been in one place in 30 years. I have to say that. So it's quite a new experience for me. It's very strange. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So when I'd be in airports, especially in America, I mean, there would be a war if you walked up halfway up the line and your friend was there and she said, come on, come in with me. No way. All the people behind will be going to be an uprising. And the security person would never dare give you permission. They say, no, it's not my job. You've got to ask all the people behind you. So you've got to go to each person behind you. May I get in front? And of course, guaranteed 90% will say no. So you don't even ask. That's why I was very naughty, especially in Delhi, where you have to walk about 40 miles to get to your gate. And for some reason, no one ever asks you for a medical certificate if you ask for a wheelchair. So you just get a wheelchair and you go straight ahead. No one questions. They never dare criticize you. But no one asked you for a medical certificate. So when I was late for flights, I'd get a wheelchair and get whizzing through the gates. It was very helpful. So, there's no way in the world, or if you're in a bus stop, and nobody minds at a bus stop, maybe, you let your friend in with you. But an enemy getting in, no way in the whole world. You go to the back. Excuse me, mate. It's automatic. We do it all the time. We live like this. We live our lives in the framework of friends, enemies, and strangers, which is attachment, aversion, and ignorance, the three poisons. These pervade the minds of all beings in the universe, So we need to look into the logic of, or the lack of logic of this. This is a profound meditation, equanimity. And the point of equanimity, it's the basis, it's the foundation practice. Without this, you can't move properly through these steps. Why? What's the logic? Once you get this logic, it's really important, but it takes time to hear it. What we're aiming to do on this compassion wing, we're trying to get bodhicitta. What the cause of bodhicitta is compassion. And what comes usually before compassion, or often with it, is love. So love and compassion are the essence of all the virtues. Love is this attitude, this thought. You see someone happy, you want them to be happy. That's love. You delight in their happiness. Then you have compassion. What's that? I think in modern psychology, they distinguish between empathy and compassion. From the Buddhist perspective, they're basically the same. Empathy or compassion, you see a person suffering and you feel their pain and you want them not to suffer. May you not suffer. This is the essence of the thought. May you be happy. May you not suffer. That's the expression of love and the expression of compassion. That's the essence. So, we do have love and compassion now. Fact. But only for the first group. That's the point. Only for the first group. That's the point. You occasionally will have it for some strangers, but once you've closed your iPad and the newspaper, you go back to your friends again. It doesn't last long. And that's just how the universe is. So what we're trying to do here with equanimity as the basis of all the future practices that culminate in bodhicitta is make this profound shift in our understanding. The logic that ego uses, which is not logic at all, is that friends deserve my love and compassion because they make me happy. That's what deserve means. Enemies, by definition, don't deserve it because they proactively, make me unhappy. Don't do what my attachment wants. And the third group, the strangers, which is 99.9%, they do neither. So we have attachment for the beloveds. We have aversion for the enemies and indifference towards the strangers. And then the only ones we have love and compassion for mostly, all is the first group. That's it. So that's just not stable. As Lama Tsongkhapa says, that love and compassion is not stable because the boyfriend can leave me. So he goes into the enemy category. Before I met the boyfriend, he was a stranger. I couldn't have cared less if he dropped dead. So it shows our love and compassion has completely got strings attached. Or as Lama Tsongkhapa says, not stable. So what we're trying to do is get love and compassion for everybody. So what's the logical basis for this is to recognize they all want to be happy and they all don't want to suffer. That becomes the logic. Then it's easy to just next step, eventually to want them to be happy and want them not to suffer. It's a logical progression. And this is where all these meditations, they're using logic. This is surprising to us. We don't think of using logic when you want to have compassion. We think of it as a gooey feeling, This is so superficial. Feelings don't last. We've got to smash ego's misconceptions by doing lots of logical analysis to prove how the love and compassion we now have is completely contingent upon attachment. We've got to prove it to ourselves and then slowly train our minds every day to change, So once you've got clear the equanimity that everybody wants happiness and nobody wants suffering, then you've got the basis for developing love and compassion for everyone, not just the first group. That's the logic of why you need equanimity first. It's the foundation upon which you will build love, compassion, great compassion, and eventually bodhicitta. So we went through this, and we started going through these 11 points. We'll just touch on the words. Go into a little bit of some of them. Now, wait, did we go through the 8 verses of mind training? We didn't do that, did we?
No, we did.
Okay, good. We'll do that today. Okay, so now let's just go through these. We did start touching on these points. So the very next one in this series of 11 techniques, which is hilarious to our minds, is this, the little heading is, the one we have to contemplate, is that all beings have been my mother. So this is based on the logic that there are trillions of sentient beings. All our minds are beginningless. There's never, almost hardly a moment we haven't had rebirths. You don't just space out for a few eons and don't have rebirths. We're continuously taking rebirths with a bit of intermediate state in between. We've had beginningless lifetimes. If we take this as a hypothesis here, it does seem logical that we've all bumped into each other countless times. I mean, as nutty as it sounds, because we don't have that awareness, because we haven't accessed our subtle mind, and we don't have clairvoyance, so we can't see this. So it's a very strange view to us. So if it's true, we've all bumped into each other countless times, then here, the thing we're trying to contemplate is there will be my mother countless times. So what's the point of this? Well, I mean, it's so shocking, like I said, it's so shocking for us in the materialist world, because we think our mums are terrible. So you're trying to make me suffer or something by thinking there will be my mum? Well, no, as His Holiness points out very kindly, it's simply an analogy, that's an example, especially in Asia, in the Eastern countries, a mother is an example of a person who's been kind to you. So you said anybody who's nurtured you. So the logic is you need to calculate for this one. All beings have been my mum. The next point to think about, to contemplate, is that the mother is kind. We went through these. We did go through these. I'm just touching upon them again, doing the second explanation. So that we have to start to look at. And the key point here, that the mother's kind. And there are 2 points here. There are 2. I think we didn't go to the second one. We'll go into the second one now. There's 3A and 3B. So 3A is the mother's kind. So I think that's a really excellent one for us to do. We did discuss this. And it's a really powerful practice for every one of us, especially if you think your mother's not kind. When we understand from high school, from the middle scope, how attachment and aversion run the show, and how when we have attachment for somebody, all we do is see their good qualities and we don't see any of their bad qualities. And we paint the whole of the person with that brush of attachment and think they're divine. If we have aversion for somebody, what we're doing is painting the whole of that person with a brush of anger and thinking they're a monster. And we run between these two. So, when I was a little girl, I was in love with my mum. That's what you do. You're a little girl, you just totally adore your mother. It's attachment. But then you start to find fault when I was about 12. And before you know it, you're downhill from there. Suddenly, within a year or how long it is, I don't know, maybe even not totally, but suddenly you've painted this monstrous picture. Your mother's evil. She's bad. She's the worst person on the planet. And people often stick with that until they die. They think their mother's evil. So the thing is, yes, some mothers are evil. Fact. Some mummies do terrible things. They're human. It's a fact. But we are so shocked that how dare my mother be evil. Somehow we have this bizarre assumption that my mother should be a saint. I don't know why we think that. Well, we do. It's because of attachment. This hubris we have of attachment, that somehow I deserve a perfect mother. It's very bizarre, all these assumptions we have about attachment, So the real point here I'm getting at is, even if your mum has been mean, this is a very profound contemplation to do. Really quite profound. Meaning you've got to look freshly at your mum and try to remember, write them down, a list of the good things she's done for you. We don't like to do it if we don't like her. We don't like to do it if she's been mean to us, if she's been horrible, if she's angry and neurotic and even beaten me and tortured me. It's really hard. And if you're not ready for this, you don't go there, okay? You don't go there. You just don't do it. But if your mummy's been a regular, ordinary, mean person, depressed and angry and neurotic, it's really powerful to remember some of the good things. She wiped your bottom. She tied your shoelaces. She put you to bed. She fed you. These are facts. You know yourself when you've done bad things to somebody. You know yourself. That does not discount the good things. This is one of the most powerful points, especially in our culture these days. We have such extreme ways we define people. Especially when it comes to like sexual misconduct or sexual abuse or heavy duty things. if a person's done one thing of sexual abuse, we think the whole person is evil. This is just not rational. I'm sorry, I don't care how bad the abuse was. It's a fact. It's just not rational. And you know it yourself. You know you did cheat on your boyfriend. It's a fact. You were mean and you cheated on your boyfriend and you lied. But you know in your heart, it doesn't discount all the other good things you do to the same boyfriend. But the boyfriend forgets that. And all he sees is a monster. This is exactly how attachment and anger function. And we've learned to calm these down in high school. So we should be ready to be able to do it here. It's quite a profound point. It's a very simple point. I mean, it's so interesting. One of my friends on death row in Kentucky, Mitchell, who's been practicing like 30, I've known him for like 25 years, as long as I've been doing the prison project. I mean, I don't do the prison project now, but I have friends in prison still. So Mitchell killed somebody. He killed several people. He was involved with one of his friends, also in the same prison, two southern white boys. And they were involved in drugs and they had guns. And if you have drugs and you have guns, I'm sorry, people die. So it happened to be 3 other people died and not them. It was a shootout, you know. Something happened, whatever the details were. So Mitchell got death sentence, and so did Leaf, his friend. So Mitchell's now getting close to his death date. You know, it keeps going and going because you've never got any money, so you get these defenders who have to be paid by the state. And so it just keeps going and going. He's been on death row for 30 years, you know. So another appeal takes 2 more years. Another appeal takes 2 more years. If you don't appeal your death sentence in America, you'll be dead in a month. But everybody appeals. That's why it takes so long, because of appeals. The death sentence is easy to, they'll line you up for the chair, no problem. That'll happen in a month. But everybody appeals naturally, you know. So he's appealing. These 30 years he's been on death row. So the point is this. I know the man. I've known him for 25 years. And so the point is also, some people are psychopathic. We use the word psychopath, you know, for very evil people, for really unhappy, distressed, very deluded, very harmful, very unhappy people. Definitely there are some people like that. And when we understand karma, we know why they're like that. And that's why we can have compassion for them. So, you know, for example, so Mitchell, he's not one of those. He's a regular guy. He was in the wrong time, in the wrong place, had drugs, had guns, and, you know, and then you kill people. People die. But he's not a psychopath. He's just a regular guy. You'd say that, but he's got some karmic imprint from killing, you know, from the past. This thing happened. So the point was this: I've known the man for like 25 years. He's a really good practitioner. He spends his life in retreat. And there's about 40 guys on death row in Kentucky. They all wear their red jumpsuits. They live together. And they all adore Mitchell because he's this kind, he's a very big, tall guy. He's a grandfather. His mummy and daddy like 90 something. They visit him once a year or something. I don't know. But I've known him for quite a while. And he's taking Refuge. He's taking the bodhichitta vows. He does several hours of practice every day, starting at 5 in the morning. He's got a much more disciplined practice than most of us, I promise you. And he's just devoted to his practice. There's nothing else to do. He's got nothing else to do. He's not distracted. He lives in his red jumpsuit. He's got this crummy food he eats. Breakfast comes at 5 o'clock, you know, gives it away. Then he does his practice. He's got his practice at night and he makes little things for people. That's his life. But he's a happy guy. He's practicing all these years, genuinely practicing Dharma all these years. Transformed himself. Now, the point is, one time he was reading, he sent me the newspaper article in which it was announced that he hadn't heard from his lawyer that one of his appeals had been denied. And he's got a couple of years left to go. And he read this article about this person. And of course, it was described as a monster. This person was described as a monster who's on death row. And he realized it was him. He got the shock of his life. What I'm getting at is we like, you know, when especially in America, where the laws are so heavy and the anger is so heavy and the vindictiveness is so heavy that if you've killed somebody, you're going to suffer till the day you die. There is no redemption for you. It's based upon this kind of insistence on not, you know, on having death row. This insistence on not giving people parole because you've done this action. You're going to suffer, baby, and you are an evil person. So we know this is not true. I can tell you with certainty, Mitch is not that man. He read this article and he laughed when he realized they were talking about him. He knows his own mind. I know the man. But this is this country. It's extraordinary. I mean, one guy I know in New York State who's been he's been the longest on death row in the whole of New York, if not the whole country. He's been 58, not on death row, 58 years in prison. He was allowed to start going for his parole in the 80s. He's been 22 times for his parole. He gets turned down every single time because there's a policy among the people in this town that he is evil. And every time his parole comes up, they get all these letters. No way is he ever going to be let out of prison. He is evil in his bones. It is so clear. It is not true. But this is the way we see the world. And it's based on anger. Anger loves to find fault. Anger wants to hold on. It is so heavy, you know. That's what we mean by enemy and friend. It's just so outrageous. We paint the picture, we paint that person with the brush that suits our needs. If they've done 4 bad things to us, they're an evil monster. If they've done 4 good things, then we call them a saint. It's just completely unstable. It's so clear. So here, no matter how bad your mum's been, if you can bear to do it, it's a powerful exercise to do, to start looking at the details. Step back and start checking some good qualities that your mother, some good things your mother did. Because the point here about kindness, the mother's kind. When we say somebody is kind, even the way we say that, it's a self-centered analysis. It means, you know, if I always use a stupid example, I go to the cafe and order my chocolate cake and the waitress gives me an extra piece or extra cream and a discount. Oh, you're so kind. We'll get so excited. You are so kind, we'll say, because she just gave you what your attachment wanted. She might think you're a fat, old, ugly, mean person. We don't care. I got my cake. I got my discount. I got my extra cream. You are so kind, we'll say. It's just lying. It's just garbage. So to say the mother's kind doesn't mean she's a sweet, soft little old lady who did lovely things all her life. No. The fact that she did anything. Kind here means the fact that anybody did anything to facilitate your life. Even if your mother did one thing, and this is my example, let's say you've been given away by your mummy at birth. Nobody I know, some might, would ever think their mother was kind because they decided not to abort them. That is a powerful reason to never forget the kindness of your mother. This is shocking to hear. It's a fact, though. Many mummies abort their babies. I aborted a baby. I'm not being mean about it. It's a fact. That's a good reason to think, thank you, mummy. But anger doesn't want to do that. Anger wants only to remember the bad things. This is the heavy part, you know. So it's a powerful exercise to do. Now, the second, 3B, this is even more surprising initially. All beings are kind. Beg your pardon. What does that mean? Well, this is amazing contemplation to do. And this is scientific truth. But we just don't think like this. This is a powerful meditation to do. And it's like really based on the teachings of interdependence, you know. Think of this. This is logic. What this one means is that everything you think from the time I've conceived up to now, everything that is, this is my words for it, everything that has facilitated my life from the time I was conceived in my mummy's womb up to the present, everything that has facilitated my life and my happiness is the handiwork of other sentient beings. This is a scientific fact, and it's mind-boggling to do it. So, of course, to say that everyone is kind, we're not saying, like we did with the mother as well, oh, they're kind people. No. We're looking objectively at the fact of interdependence, that everything you have, even starting with your body. What's my body? It's a little mountain of cows and fishes and bulls that my mother ate in the 7 months I was in her womb. Not to mention the veggies, not to mention all the creatures who died for the veggies and all the sentient beings. My mother put it into her mouth, it went down into her system, and it turned into my body. I mean, your little body, what is your body? My body? No, it's a mountain of little creatures that fishes and all transformed into your body. And your mother's blood and all this turned into your body like a miracle. My God, that's unbelievable. Then you came out of the mummy's womb squealing and crying. And then in my case, at the Mercy Hospital, the nuns in Melbourne wrapped me up in a little woolly blanket. Well, that was made from a kind sheep. They put me in warm water. Where was the warm water from? From the hot water tap. Who made the hot water tap? The electrical company. All the people who work for the electrical company make sure the electricity is working. So the water that comes out the tap that kept my body cozy in that little bath when I came out of my mummy's womb was kept warm. All those countless people. If you start doing this, you'll have nobody left in the universe that hasn't facilitated your happiness. These are facts, but whoever thinks it, we don't. Because we have this hubris of attachment. I deserve. So we take it all for granted. This is a profound contemplation to do. Everything, then the woolly blanket from all those sheep, your mother's milk, again, coming from all the food in her body, the nourishment in her body, the milk will come out and feed you. Then when you get a bit older, you start to eat the carrots and the veggies and the apples. People picked those apples. People grew those apples. The little creatures in the ground were killed to pick those apples. These are facts. This is dependent arising. I love this thinking, but we just have to remember it. We don't remember it because we take it all for granted. I mean, my glasses alone, I can see nothing without them. I'm as blind as a bat. My eyes go in, I'm all cross-eyed. I've got triples, about plus 12 down here. I've had glasses since I was a little girl, you know. There's no way in the universe I could see a thing without my glasses. Unbelievable. Must be many people on the planet who can't afford glasses, who can't see anything. These kind people, because they're so thick, you know, if I had old-fashioned glass, there'd be like a saucer on my nose. It'd go down to there. Have a big lump. But these clever people have invented very clever, fine, thin material, which is expensive, but they've made it thin, so it facilitates. So all these clever humans, never stopping thinking of how to make things better. It's making people happy. These are facts. I like my blue socks. I like blue socks. I've got blue canvas shoes. I dye dark blue. It matches I'm not joking, my little bit of blue here. This is a marvelous piece of blue here. What this is, just by the way, at some point in Tibet, back, I don't know when, some naughty king didn't like the Dharma, was trying to knock off all the Sangha. And they were running out of a Sangha to keep a quota to keep the Dharma going. Because the criterion of the existence in Dharma in one place, according to the Buddha, is the presence of 4 fully ordained monks or nuns. So they were running out of a quota for ordinations. So they snuck a Chinese monk over the border. So they had the quota so they could continue to ordination. So they kept the Dharma alive in Tibet. Well, he must have worn blue because we have this on here. This is blue in respect for that Chinese monk. That's just by the way. So anyway, I have my blue shoes and my blue socks. So when I go into the shop, you know, and I want my blue socks, navy blue. So if I go to Kmart or somewhere, you know, nobody to help you there, but you go to the section where it says blue socks, and then you look at the socks, and they're in their own little cardboard packet, and there's words on it. Well, somebody wrote those words, so I could know that size something. Not just a pile of socks in a big heap along with pink and blue ones, pink and yellow ones. No, they're blue. They're there with a little hanger. Someone invented the hanger and the little cardboard, little kind of shoulders on it with the words on it. Somebody wrote those words. Somebody actually wrote the words, did the copy. Somebody proofread the words. Somebody typed them. Somebody printed that label. These are real human beings. They're not thinking of you. We're prepared to thank somebody if they thought specially of me, like the waitress. We just say it's their job. No, the fact that they did their job, the fact that they did it, all these dependent arising sentient beings, I can get blue socks to keep my tootsies warm, you know. I can get glasses that fit me, that are geared to my eyes so I can see. This is like a miracle. And who does all this? Sentient beings. They don't come falling out of the sky like this. The blue socks don't come falling out of the sky. This is a profound, logical contemplation to do. But we don't remember it, because we see everything through the lenses of my needs. So, you know, if I go to the socks and the socks are really well made and the person smiles at me and hands them over personally, I'm prepared to say thank you. But I've got to search them for them myself. No way. Now, this is the point about kind. The person who did the typesetting on that little kind of shoulder on my set of blue socks, he might be a pedophile. I don't care. That's not the point here, though. That's not the issue. That person's kind, not because in his nature he's kind. No, it's because the fact that he did his job, all these cogs in the wheel of dependent arising worked beautifully. End result, I get socks. It's to think of all these cogs in the wheel, these human cogs and the non-human cogs, all the ones who died, the creatures who died. I mean, we get very holy and think because we don't eat meat that somehow we're not harming sentient beings. What a load of rubbish. Billions of creatures died just to pick the vegetables. Billions. We never think about them because we're so fanatic about eating. We think we're a holy saint because we don't eat meat. You're not a saint. Just existing, we harm sentient beings. So all these billions of creatures who've died just so you get a fresh veggie, I mean, the point of this is to realize, I mean, it helps us realize dependent arising, but it's helping to realize, oh my God, everything I have, everything I've ever had since I'm born is the handiwork of suffering sentient beings. So the logical conclusion number 4 is I must repay their kindness. This is logic. We don't think it. We're prepared to thank somebody if it's what I want. So it's a powerful one. Just remember, you walk down the supermarket, everything in the shelves, all the labels on the shelves. People walk up and down doing that. People have typed the shelf. People have done it. They've designed the packet and put the words on it and made the food, and the animals have died for the food. All this is I mean, how sometimes they have those advertisements on television. Some companies, like a telephone company, or some kind of company, will have in the advertisement, there'll be a big long shot of all the 47 workers. This is exactly the point. You get your little phone, but you realize in that little shop, 47 people all worked hard, and you see these 47 people all smiling. Hello. That's this meditation. This is dependent arising in relation to sentient beings. And you can't argue with this. This is fact. But again, we think, what do you mean they're kind? They're doing their job. So our hubris, our arrogance because of attachment. It's an incredible contemplation to do. All beings are kind. It's huge. Then the conclusion number 4, I must repay their kindness. We understand this point. Remember Lama Tsongkhapa said one time, he was teaching at the Copan course, and all the Westerners coming from visiting, or you come traveling, so they're there. And he said, yourself, if like you're traveling in a foreign country and you run out of money or something traumatic happens and someone helps you, you never forget their kindness. You'll never forget that person's kindness. Well, every being since you're born, everything you've ever had since you're born, conceived, is the work of sentient beings, but who are invisible to you. And but for their work, you wouldn't have food, you wouldn't have glasses, you wouldn't have your socks. This is facts. The point isn't that they're kind in their nature. No, the point isn't that they're thinking about you. They're not thinking about you. That's not the point. It's the fact that they did it. And if they did their job like a miracle, all these cogs in the wheel, these sentient cogs, like a miracle, it all happened. You get socks and clothes and glasses and food. But we take it for granted. Why? Because we have the hubris of attachment. So it's a very humbling, unbelievable contemplation to do. And then eventually they say that the yogis who meditate on these points, when they've realized even the mother one, the kindness of the mother, whatever they see sentient beings, is a spontaneous, oh mother, the kindness of incredible affection for whoever they meet. I mean, that's pretty profound, That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to loosen the grip of self-centeredness. We're trying to loosen the grip of the ego, of the self-cherishing. We're trying to make this shift. All these techniques are to help us break down our misconceptions so that we begin to see the preciousness of other sentient beings. This is a very hard one for us. Our child is precious, our grandchild is precious, maybe. But all of them precious, this is kind of intense, So now that's the 4th one, the kindness of the aspiration. I must repay their kindness. So the next little steps that then eventually 5, 4, 9, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 8 more that culminate in the 11th, which is bodhichitta, are all now coming from the exchanging self for others approach. So this next one, these are very tiny, seemingly tiny points, but they're each of them quite precise. And each we need to spend time on thinking through and unpacking and unraveling and understanding before we lead to the next one. They all each lead quite precisely to each one, And so the next one, we're now moving gradually towards the whole concept of exchanging self for others. So the next one goes, all beings are equal to me in wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer. It's exactly the same as equanimity, but equanimity is all beings are equal to each other. Now it's all beings are the same as me in wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer. This is getting more intense, Because what we've got to understand, the instinct, first we've got the root delusion, ego grasping, ma rigpa, unawareness, the main delusion that runs the universe, ignorance, known colloquially as ego grasping when it's related to the I. So this is the one that is the cause of all samsara. And this is the one that is uprooted when we've realized emptiness. We're going to get to that in the 6 perfections. Once we've got bodhicitta, we go to the final stages of the body of the Lam Rim. We go to the final stages of the path to enlightenment. We do the 6 perfections of the bodhisattva. The first 4 are where we're perfecting, that we're on the basis of getting bodhicitta, which we're moving towards. We'll then do the 6 perfections. And that's what the final one is where we realize emptiness. Everything's leading to that. Okay, so here, because we have ego grasping, this root delusion that already creates the sense, creates a separate me, concrete, solid, real, intrinsic, separate me. And there's various consequences of that. So one is, and that's how we deal in the junior school and high school approach, the low scope and middle scope. What we're trying to do there is at least calm down the body and speech, which are the servants of the main voices of this ego grasping, which are attachment to get what that I wants, and then the aversion when it doesn't get what it wants. We're trying to steady all that. We're trying to stop the servants of that attachment and aversion and stop harming others. And then we're trying to stop the attachment and the aversion. These are the branch delusions, the main voices, to get what that supposed I wants. So then the main energy there is to understand attachment and aversion and all the other delusions like jealousy and all the rest. Now in the compassion wing, it's this different emphasis. There we're trying to stop our own suffering. Here, we're continuing to work on our own mind. That doesn't change. But here, instead of talking about attachment, we can still talk about it. But here, the main problem as a result of this ego grasping is the putting of me first. So it's another way of presenting attachment. So they call it self-cherishing. We call it selfishness. Putting self first. So the whole emphasis, starting with equanimity, all the way through the 11 points to bodhicitta, the whole point is we're trying to do this gradual shift where we're learning to literally exchange self for others and realize and to try to cherish others more than self. You can still talk about it as giving up attachment, but it's framed as self-cherishing. The main enemy in junior school and high school is framed as attachment to get what the I wants. It's just a different approach, So here it's in reference to try to lessen the neurotic sense of important me and grow this sense of important other. So of course it's logical if you take these stages of the path. This is logical that if this is at the university level, the great scope, it's logical, it's dependent upon decent practice in high school and junior school. You can't just leap into this level of compassion. It's too profound. And the other major point here, just going off to the side a bit, but getting this really clear is incredibly important. Even just look at the word compassion. Okay, we're getting to that. We're leading to getting compassion. We're leading to it. But look at what compassion is. It's empathy with the suffering of another. So then we have to know what suffering is, don't we? Well, we've got to go back to high school to know that, and we have to learn about our own suffering. That's why you've got to have high school and junior school first. You've got to know what suffering is, and that's the Four Noble Truths. There's the suffering of suffering, which is when the bad things happen. Then there's the more subtle level of suffering, which is the suffering of change, which is when the good things happen, when attachment gets what it wants. And then there's even the most subtle level of suffering. So this once we realize these three levels of suffering, even a little bit in high school, and we want to stop our own suffering. Now, when we start to look at the rest of the world, and we'll go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. Everybody wants to be happy. Nobody wants to suffer. Everybody has the suffering of suffering. Lots of people have the suffering of change. And what's that mean? That's the happy people. The people who are getting what their attachment wants. The happy people, the rich people, the beautiful people. And we would never think, what do you mean have compassion for them? They're happy. But you don't know that that's not happiness until you've done high school. You can't just leap into having compassion, because the only compassion we have now, without thinking about it, is only for the people who have the suffering of suffering, the ones who have bad things happening. We don't have compassion for the rich, beautiful people. Why would we? We think because they're not suffering, but they are. It's a deeper level. And we never have compassion for the bad people. There's no way we have compassion for the bad people. That's weird. But until we know what suffering is and its causes, back in high school, suffering and its causes, karma and delusions, then this is the basis, one, for our own getting rid of suffering and its causes, because we're sick of it, but it's the basis of now being able to see the entire universe is caught up in one level or another of this suffering. And even the bodhisattvas, eventually, they have more compassion for the harmer than the harmed. Why? The harmed was the harmer in the past and is now experiencing the suffering of their own past actions. The harmer was the harmed in the past and is now getting back at that person. And so the person who's being harmed by having that experience of suffering is now finishing that suffering. The person harming is just beginning countless lifetimes of future suffering. It's like the pedophile kid, the pedophile. That pedophile has a mother. That mother adores her boy. She's broken-hearted. But the point about the mummy for the pedophile boy, she knows that little boy since he was born. She knows his needs and little heart and his good qualities. And she knows, yes, he's causing others suffering, but she knows he's harming himself. That's this level of suffering, the level of compassion that we cannot get until we've done high school and understood our own suffering and its causes. That's why compassion is not enough, His Holiness says. You've got to have wisdom, and wisdom begins by the junior school and high school. It's incremental. This knowledge is incremental. You can't just leap, you know. So this next one, the fifth one on the Lam Rim, is 11 points. The contemplation to do is to start to think about how all others, the entire universe out there, all want to be happy and want to not suffer, just like me. Then the next one is to start to equalize. They're the same as me. I think that's equalizing. They're the same as me. And you've got to use lots of logical analysis to argue with ego's deep misconception, because their ego's misconception that I'm more important. We don't like to think that we think we're more important. And until we're a bodhisattva, there's going to be that will be naturally there to some degree. We can see some people genuinely have compassion for other people. It's definitely true, because we've done this work before. But until we've realized bodhicitta, there's going to be a very powerful sense of self-cherishing there, just naturally, spontaneously, naturally. So to think logically, how that all others and me, there's not a fraction of difference. This is hard to hear, because the instinct of ego grasping is so strong, so primordial after countless lifetimes, that it's just natural. What about me? You know, I comes up first. Until we're a bodhisattva, that will be how it is. So we're trying to conquer that, aren't we? It's quite profound. It's quite uncomfortable. So because the delusions are so entrenched in their deep illogic. Yep. Oh, what's happened? Sorry. Can you hear my phone ringing? Is my phone ringing? Hang on a second. Sorry. Okay. So, what time is it? 11, 12, 1. Okay, we're fine. Okay. Okay, but I think we should have some questions before I continue. Have some questions. Come on, folks, if you have any.
Please unmute yourself for questions or type in the chat. There's nothing in the chat right now. Raise your hand if you want to ask a question. The virtual hand.
What's happening?
There's no question, Venerable.
No question. Okay, that's fine. So I'll continue. So yeah, so we have to be very humble about this and look carefully, and don't just think, oh no, I put others first. These are we're talking about very primordial level of these delusions. You know, it's going to be very humble to see this. So we've got to use lots of logic to argue with these misconceptions and to recognize them. It's not easy because they're so spontaneous. It's so utterly instinctive, utterly instinctive. We're programmed from countless lifetimes of putting me first, which is the key, which is this consequence of ego grasping that posits a separate me in the first place. So I'm a bit confused at the numbers here. So this must be equalizing yourself. All others are the same as me. Yeah, we're equalizing ourselves with others. And now we start to look at, this sounds so kind of silly and almost small, but these are very deep contemplations. The next one is to contemplate the disadvantages to me of cherishing myself more than others. This sounds peculiar. One of our commonest problems when we even hear back in the teachings on karma in junior school, that this approach here is to think about stopping wanting to harm others because you don't want suffering. We skip over that and we think that sounds selfish. We've missed the point if we don't get that. That's a bit like you've never heard of nutrition, and then you learn about nutrition. And then someone says, oh, well, you know, eating that wrong food makes you sick, Robina. Oh, no, I don't want to think about me being sick. I've got to think about all the other people being sick. You've got to learn about how you're sick first. You've got to learn about what your eating habits are, why you eat sugar, and what sugar does to you. You've got to know it intimately for yourself, and you've got to be revolted by that future suffering, so you want to give it up. Then you're qualified to help others. It's exactly the same here. That's what renunciation is. You're not giving up other people's suffering first. You're giving up your own suffering. You've got to be revolted by suffering. You've got to be revolted by suffering and the causes. You've got to have a genuine horror of suffering and the delusions. You've got to have that for yourself. That's like compassion for yourself. That's what renunciation is. You can't skip over that. So here it's the same attitude. You've got to see, because we've still got a sense of a separate self. So we've got to see the disadvantages to oneself of being selfish. Now, so then if you don't want to think about yourself, you know other people. Think of a person you know who's really self-centered. And because you understand it now, you know that they're suffering. We don't like to think they're suffering normally. We think we're just mean people. But look how they suffer. Look at a person who's very self-centered and look how they suffer. No one likes them. They're always miserable. They're always blaming everybody else. They never get what they want. I mean, the point is you've got to see the suffering that your selfishness causes you. It's a bit like the first level of practice, seeing how your harming others harms you. It demands a lot of self-awareness and honesty to ourselves and integrity and authenticity. This is hard to do because we don't like to admit that we're self-centered. It sounds like an accusation. It's too heavy for us, you know. But you know yourself, the people who are really mean and nasty, nobody can stand them. This is the point that's so important that we miss, you know. When we think of bad people, in our culture, we never think that they're suffering. We just think they're evil and they deserve to be harmed. They deserve to go to prison. They deserve the bad things that happen because it's so linked with anger. But the point that Buddha's making right back in junior school and high school is that our harming others and our delusions are what harm me. So renunciation is really like compassion for yourself. If you don't have this, you're not got the right attitude. So it's the same here. We're still, relatively speaking, trying to realize why we suffer. So just this next point is, look at the disadvantages to you of being selfish. It's another way of saying being attached. Nobody likes you. You don't get what you want. You're always miserable. It is so obvious, but we have to think of it like that. And it's based in a wish to be kind to yourself. It's hard for us, though, because we hear it as in a punitive way. And the next one is you're getting gradually moving towards exchanging self for others. The next one says, and look at the advantages to you of cherishing others. But then again, we'll think, oh, that sounds selfish. No, get it. I remember His Holiness, this is a so powerful point. When I first heard the teachings on bodhichitta, when I first went to my Lam Rim courses, I thought, these people are insane. How can anybody have that level of compassion? Because there's nothing in our ordinary world like that. It's just not possible. It seemed too high. I couldn't reach it. And then I heard His Holiness say, and this is the whole approach I'm talking about, if you want to help others, practice compassion. If you want to help yourself, practice compassion. This is the thing that we find hard, but it's profound if we can hear it. So this point is exactly about that. Look at the advantages to yourself. And that doesn't mean you do it in a manipulative way, because that's what ego does. Ego thinks if I'm nice to you, you'll be nice to me. That's garbage. That's attachment. It's not like that. It's trying to see objectively. And if you can't do it for yourself, look at other people. Think of people you know who everybody adores. Why? Because they're kind and loving and easygoing and forgiving, and they don't judge you and don't criticize you, because then they are thinking of other people, and they're the happiest people around. I'm not talking about the victims. If we're still in the victim mode right at the beginning, we haven't looked at our minds, this is a really major point for us in our culture. Some of us are just like naughty, loud, bossy people like me. Some people are more quiet and are mummy's little helpers. And I mean this now, seeing in both ways. So the mummy's helpers are nice people. They're kind. They're always the first to help. They're always saying, I'll do it, I'll do it. But what they don't realize is that that's the way they define themselves as a good person. I'm mummy's little helper. So their attachment is their compassion and their kindness is polluted by their attachment to being seen as a nice girl. And that's why they get misused by others. That's why you get treated like a doormat. And that's why so many people in relationships don't know why they're such a kind person, but they always get bullied because they don't realize it's because of their attachment. It's easy to see a person like me who's a mean person shouts and yells and bullied my sisters, but it's much harder for one of my sisters to see that her attachment was mixing with her being mummy's little helper to make everything lovely, because attachment's a junkie that wants to make everything nice. So the good girls go around trying to make everything nice, not realizing it's their attachment making a mess of their kindness. So that's what we've got to work on in the wisdom wing. So putting others first sounds lovely if we don't understand it properly. We've got to understand it properly. So, the person is always saying yes, but it's mixed with their attachment and they wonder why they get misused. They've got to become more strong and clear and maybe say no sometimes, get a bit of wisdom, So when we're at this level, we're quite more advanced. There's assumption here we've really worked on our attachment. So here, we're really trying to see that, genuinely putting self first, not just mixed with attachment, putting self first. It's quite a big difference, Then the next step is, and that's 4, 5, 6, I lose track of the numbers. I'll miss some out, I'm sure. So now I think, and I've definitely missed some out, I think, we now get to the point where we're now ready to actually exchange ourselves for others. And so Tonglen is the technique that's used, that is the essential practice that conveys this approach. So this is now, I think, where I want to go to these 8 verses. It's a perfect time to go into the 8 verses, because the 7th verse is where Tonglen comes from. So this whole, all this approach here, this whole approach now to the section, into the section from the 5th onwards of exchanging self for others, is so radical an approach, so advanced, so shocking, so against normal, worldly behavior. Powerful level of practice. So these 8 verses by Lungri Tangpa, a Tibetan, a disciple, I think, of Dromtompa, who was the main disciple of Atisha, I think, something like that. And this whole approach of exchanging self for others came from Atisha, I think, and he got it from Selingpa, his guru in Sumatra, in Indonesia. He spent many years there with him. This is back in the 11th century, and Buddhism must have been flourishing. Vajrayana was flourishing in Indonesia at the time. And he spent many years there with Selingpa. And he came initially from this great Nalanda tradition, the Nalanda monastery, in India, which began flourishing from the 7th century. So as His Holiness Dalai Lama was always pointing out, our tradition in Tibet is straight from the Nalanda tradition. So the Nalanda monastery kind of collapsed. 11th century, 12th century. And I think that coincided with the collapsing of Buddhism and the increase of Islam in India, historically. So but it is 7th century, it carried right over to Tibet. It continued unbroken. So this Nalanda tradition, as His Holiness says, all the greatest, all the body, the literature that we study in depth in the great monastic university system, is coming from all these great Indian masters, Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, all these people. And Atisha is one of them. So anyway, he got this powerful approach of exchanging self for others, I think, from Selingpa, I think. And he got to Tibet, and he brought it to Tibet, but it was kept secret in the beginning. It's so outrageous. It's kept secret. These practices were kept secret. And only after Dromtompa, they became more public, So these 8 verses express this attitude, this approach in the most radical, outrageous way. This whole approach of driven by the wish to accomplish bodhichitta, you then have this brave approach, this brave attitude that in general they call it, this whole approach called transforming problems into happiness. It's this whole attitude of these beings at this level of practice on the basis of success earlier, on the basis of the wisdom wing, on the basis of high school and junior school. You're moving this, you've subdued your body and speech and mind to some incredible degree. You've already got equanimity. You've got love and you've got this wish to see others, blah, blah, and you're moving to in this view. So this whole approach here is this radical approach where you would rather have a problem than have something go nicely. This is very, very bizarre behavior. But we understand it in the ordinary world. We admire, like I always think of someone like Federer, someone like Lance Armstrong. Okay, he's a naughty boy now, but that type of fanaticism, that level of total dedication to their goal, we admire that in the West. So think of Federer, just Federer. Years and years and years and years and years of listen to this, sacrifice. Sacrificing what? He probably got up at 4 a.m. These little I think of these little gymnasts, they sacrifice their lives. They sacrifice 90 other things. They sacrifice food, pleasure, sleep, other activities, relaxing. And we admire them. We admire their incredible qualities, They work so hard, pushing themselves beyond their limit every single day. Nobody thinks they're maniacs. Nobody thinks they're mentally ill. So you could argue they delight in that sacrifice, which means they prefer the problems. A problem is when attachment gets what it doesn't want. So for them, you get up at 4 a.m, they'd rather go to sleep, but they sacrifice it all. But we admire that. Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do here. So what are we sacrificing? We're trying to transform our minds to go beyond attachment, beyond aversion, beyond delusions, beyond self-cherishing, so we can develop this incredible compassion that eventually culminates in this primordial shift where now others are more important. So we're driven by this incredible wish to want to help others. I mean, this is the job we're trying to get, So from that perspective, if delusions are your main problem, the cause of your happiness, the cause of your suffering, then obviously anything that triggers your delusions is the best thing in the world. Lance Armstrong loved the high mountains. He didn't get depressed when he had to cycle harder up the mountains. This was the challenge. He was glad to go against the inertia and to force his muscles to get stronger and stronger so he could become the best cyclist in the universe, you know? That kind of pushing against and enjoying the problems. I mean, that level of pain, I remember reading an article about him years ago, and the level of pain he would experience, but he was so driven by his goal. So I'm talking exactly the same with bodhisattvas, driven by the goal to become a bodhisattva. You want to get rid of delusions because they're your obstacle. So anything that triggers your delusions, which means a person is mean to you, you are so happy. It's exactly the same, but we're considered mentally ill if we think like that in our culture, you know, because we're so self-centered. So these 8 verses are outrageous. The first one already is so shocking, it's hard to even talk about it. Listen to my words. Listen to the words of the 8 verses. I'll just say them in a colloquial. I don't know the exact words, but the attitude in each one. So this first one says, the first line says, in order to get the greatest benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, I will hold all of them most dear at all times. So the person writing this, you know, anybody who writes something like this is not pretending. This has got to be real. Well, analyze those words. They're completely insane. Don't just say them like, oh, isn't that lovely? Yes, all sentient beings, blah, blah. Look at the words. So first of all, the first line is too weird for us. It says, in order to get the benefit from all sentient beings, we think it must mean for. No, this is a very particular attitude that they talk about. We've got to understand this, otherwise it's too weird. There's this whole approach they talk about how bodhisattvas need sentient beings. They need suffering sentient beings. What does that mean? Well, you know, if you want to be the best doctor on the planet, if you want to become the best doctor on the planet, you're totally driven by the wish to be the best doctor on the planet because you're so driven by compassion. Think of it, it's a perfect analogy. What do you need most? You need suffering people. You need to be around suffering people. You won't just have a little office in a rich suburb where you put your little sign up and you dispense Band-Aids for half an hour. You will go to the doctors sans frontières, whatever you call it, isn't it? And you will go to the war zones where the worst suffering people are, and you'll pull your sleeves up eagerly and rush into those tents in those war zones and happily use every tool, every skill you have to heal those wounded people. Get the point? You'll be so eager, you will want that environment. You don't want people to suffer, but you need suffering people in order to become the best doctor on the planet, so you can then be perfectly qualified to help every single one. That's what the bodhisattvas are trying to do. So we need suffering sentient beings. And as Geshe Stopa said, bodhisattvas, best of all, need their enemies. Best one of all. Because that's the one that bullseye completely confronts your delusions. That's like Lance Armstrong and his high mountains. He's so happy. This is intense. This is intense. So the first verse, in order to get the benefit from all these suffering beings. Now the next line is ridiculous. Who are more precious, and it means to me than a wish-fulfilling jewel. Well, forget about a wish-fulfilling jewel. There used to be such a thing eons ago when we had another type of human birth before this planet, when we had subtle light bodies. Forget those altogether. But just change the words to, it'll do, 1,000,000 francs. Who are more precious, think of these words, please, analyze them carefully. Who all sentient beings who are more precious to me than 1,000,000 francs. Now, I'm sorry, what in the name of God does that mean? Think about it. Don't just say it in a glossy way. It's a completely insane idea. It means the person's so driven by this. I mean, already it seems like a bodhisattva is writing this, you know. It has to be. This level of compassion is like demented. You can't understand it. When I hear Lama Zopa talk, everybody says he's a holy being who's got this level of compassion. When he talks, he has to have, because you can't pretend. You can't pretend, you know. This level of compassion, you can't pretend. So, what does it mean that all sentient beings are more precious for me than 1,000,000 francs? What it means is, without meeting suffering sentient beings every day, how can you become a Buddha? And you're so driven by this incredible wish to become a Buddha, it's spontaneous and continuous in your mind. And this means that already, in a sense, you've got bodhicitta, you know, already you've got there, you've done there, you're there. Then you can't bear the thought of any second where you're not smashing delusions every second, every second. So therefore, they are more precious. 1,000,000 francs is nothing. I mean, that's so high, it's hard to hear, you know. But this is, he's speaking his heart. I will hold them as more dear at all times. Now, the next one, I always joke and say, if you were a therapist and you gave this advice to your client, they could happily sue you for abuse. You listen to me. Something like, when you're with others, see yourself as the lowest of all. Not just that. And see others as supreme. That's essentially what the second verse is saying. So how do we get our head around that, you know? So if we're an ordinary person, and we mostly are, with lots of self-cherishing and an attachment to comfort, and attachment to get things nice, and attachment to be liked, we're just driven by this, just naturally, you know? So when we're with others, if we're an ordinary person, that means we're in a group of people. I mean, even if we're nice people, I'm not talking about being monsters and pedophiles, we're not that. But we're an ordinary person driven by ego grasping, which asserts the self, the separate self, driven therefore by this very big neediness, especially when we're with other people. It's just very natural for us to be driven by this neediness to be seen as a nice person. It's the most primordial attachment of all. We'll get to this when we get to the 8 worldly dharmas, which is all in this section here. We're going to run out of time. Look at this. This is the most primordial. It's all in this period, all around this area, in this time. It's all in this section of practice where we're going to also look into what they call the 8 worldly dharmas. In fact, it comes in the 8 verses at the end, I think. Yeah, it does. So then let's just mention it here. Our major attachment, I'll just mention briefly, our major attachment, more than sex, drugs, and rock and roll, is to be seen as a nice person. So that is automatic, spontaneous, natural, instinctive within all of us. Until we're bodhisattvas, really, you know. But we, you know, levels and levels. So when we're with other people, being a fairly normal person, and this is embarrassing to think about because we don't like to think we're like this. There's always that, you know, a sense of comparing with others. Now, interestingly, some of us might think, well, I already see myself as the lowest of all. This is a really good point. Some of us are very self-conscious in a group of people. Some of us feel very embarrassed, feel very shy, or look around and think everybody is more beautiful and more happy than me. That's a really common thing we feel. And so we think, I got low self-esteem. So what do you mean, see myself as the lowest of all? I already do that. But this is what's interesting. That's not obviously what they're saying. Langru Tangpa is not suggesting that. With ego grasping and with lots of attachment and dissatisfaction, that is how we feel. But look at it. So there's not a feeling of this feeling. If you're doing this, what he says, you are joyful in seeing everybody else's marvelous qualities. You're delighted to see that person over there. They've got lovely qualities. So you're delighting. It's a delight for you to see other people. A superior sounds weird to us, but they mean you delight in other people's qualities. But the one of low self-esteem, which is how when we hear him say, see yourself as the lowest of all, and we think, well, I already do that. That's not what he's saying. What we have got is low self-esteem, but low self-esteem, I'm really sorry to tell you this, is embarrassing, is the flip side of arrogance. You see, we're comparing with others and we're thinking, oh, they're better than me. And we are very unhappy about it. We would rather be better than them. Arrogance is an overinflation of your good qualities. low self-esteem is an overinflation of your bad qualities, and they're related to each other. So if you've got low self-esteem, I'm sorry, it's the flip side of arrogance. This is very painful to hear because you're comparing other people. And when a person's got low self-esteem, everybody else looks happier, everybody else looks more intelligent, and we're not happy about it. Think about this. When they're resentful, how dare they be more happy? Look at all those happy people. They're all more better than me. And this, so self-loathing is a really horrible quality. And it's the flip side of arrogance. It sounds very painful to hear this. So this one is a completely different attitude. You know, you're really trying to delight in other people's qualities. So a good way to practice this. I mean, he says all. Obviously, he's accomplished it. We can do it one step at a time. And I think a powerful way to practice this is, let's say, one person. Just think of them in your own mind. You think of one person you know, like at work or in your family, especially if you don't like them. Think of one thing that they have or a quality they've got that's better than you. It's a very powerful practice, and delight that they are better than you at that. That implies you put yourself lower. But I mean, we don't like the sound of that, but get the simple meaning. It's a very powerful practice. Delight that they're better than you at this. This is a very hugely powerful, it's an atomic bomb on attachment and, you know, ego grasping and self-cherishing. The next one says, and this implies a yogi who's got single point of concentration practically, that you're watching, basically it's watching your mind like a hawk, and the millisecond a delusion arises that is a danger to you and others, you will quickly avert it. I mean, this is like a miracle. We don't even see our minds. A million thoughts a day, we don't even notice 99% of them until they're shouting. So this implies already an incredible disciplined practice of single point of concentration, and you're watching your mind like a hawk, and the millisecond a delusion pops up. Whereas for us, it's the other way around. The delusions are our default mode. And then a millisecond of virtue pops up, we're delighted, you know. So this implies just incredible awareness and discipline, watching the mind every second. Now, the next three each get worse, more intense. It's got a sense this next one is related to the world out there in general. And it says something like, when you hear about, and this is back in, remember, 11th century Tibet, you wouldn't have met too many psychopaths, I promise. These days, the universe is riddled with psychopaths and suffering people. But it says something like, when you hear about a person who is evil and full of suffering and harming others, or something like that, an evil person. Well, what do we call that in our fancy Greek words? We call that a psychopath, an intensely suffering person. But of course, in our culture, we don't think of them as suffering. We just think of them as evil, you know. But they're suffering. That's the point. Intensely suffering, causing suffering, and in themselves unbearably suffering. When you hear about them, and we hear about them every day, you'll see them as like a precious treasure. So why would you do that? That's like the high mountain for Federer. That's the high mountain for, what's his name, the other fellow, the bicyclist, Armstrong. He delights when he sees this terrible mountain. So here, when you see the worst maniac people, they're a treasure for you because it's forcing you to have compassion. It's forcing you to have compassion. It's easy to have compassion for your little grandchild. Your heart will pour out love and compassion. But look at the maniac, the pedophile, the terrorist, the murderer, the maniac. Instantly, we want to have aversion for them. So it smashes your self-cherishing, and you only want to have such unbearable compassion for them. They're like a treasure for you. The next verse, it seems to me, is getting closer to home. I think this would be like in our work environment or in your sort of broader family environment. Think about this one. Basically, if you've been accused, I can't think of the right words, but if you've been accused of something you didn't do, you take the blame and give the victory to the other. I mean, this is insane. Even when we've been accused of doing something we did do, it's painful to take responsibility. So this is like a direct assault, you know, on instinct of self-cherishing. Unbelievably powerful to take the blame, accept and give the victory to them. Try it once a month, okay? This is so powerful. I mean, even the smallest accusation is like absolute horror. The instinct of I rises like a sleeping lion, you know. I did not do that. The third one, this third next one, the 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, this is the most intense. This is the most painful. This seems to me is like your beloved child or your beloved husband, a person you've given your life for. They completely turn against you. I will see this person as my guru. I mean, the number of people, you know, who come to me, parents, for example, whose children have completely rejected them. The pain is unbearable. I can't even bear to think about it, you know. Or people who've sacrificed their lives for their partner and they've been totally rejected. But the old parents, especially old parents in old people's homes, have been chucked out and treated like veggies, you know. This is unbearable, just too unbearable for words. But this is the most, I mean, this is the most powerful levels of practice. You've got to be Pabonka Rinpoche says in the Lam Rim, this level of practice, you've got to be a suitable vessel. And what is a suitable vessel? A person who's done junior school, high school, and the earlier stages of getting compassion, earlier stages of equanimity and so on. This is outrageous. And if you're not at this level, you leave these practices alone, please. This is our problem. We see all spiritual practices having equal status, but this is shocking. This is university level, please. If you're not capable, if you're still in the level of being a victim, if you've been abused by your husband all your life, you've been abused by your parents, you do not go anywhere near practices like this. You do not go anywhere near even karma. There's a person I know who when she just hears about karma, feels she's been abused and she's been blamed for her suffering that her mother caused her. She actually thinks karma's blaming her. She's abused by it. So then forget about karma. If you're not ready for it, you can't take it on. So we've got to know where we're at with these teachings. So you can read them with the aspiration to one day be like this. But these are incremental, gradual levels of practice. And these are so outrageous. No wonder they were kept secret. No wonder they were kept secret, you know. So it's 10-2. And then the last two, the next one is the 8, basically is Tonglen. Basically, the next one is Tonglen. It's where Tonglen, I think it's the source of Tonglen, this practice. So I'll just mention it briefly, and then we'll leave it there. It says something like, so, you know, I will take upon myself the suffering of others, and I will secretly give away all my good things, all my merits, all my happiness. So this is this final one that is now the practice that will bring that paradigm shift of bodhichitta, which is where you've actually exchanged self for others. So we're talking here, not just, you see, one of the biggest mistakes I think we think about meditation in the West, we think of it as like you've got to have an experience. We think of it as a one-off experience. It's a very bizarre idea, actually, but it's very deeply entrenched in our minds. It's complete nonsense. Oh, I had a good meditation this morning, we'll say. It basically means you felt good. Well, I'm happy you felt good, but that's hardly the criterion of success. This is training. Meditation is training. These meditations are training, like years and years of playing tennis. Someday you had a good time, but you've got to see the one tennis day where you felt good in the framework of the entire practice. It's all training. You just keep going until you can hit the ball every time spontaneously. That's the same here. It's not just an experience. We're such junkies for experiences, for feelings. It's like childish, you know. It's training. You're reprogramming your mind, radically reconfiguring, unpacking, unraveling the misconceptions, and repackaging, reconstructing brand new concepts until you've got the mind of a bodhisattva. As Lama Zopa says, you can mold your mind into any shape you like. And we're talking conceptual thoughts until eventually they're spontaneous, you know. So Tonglen, giving, taking, giving, taking. And for some people in the West, for some reason, people love this meditation, but it's completely outrageous. But I think we often misunderstand it. Just look what it is and what it's not. So basically, there's a way to do this meditation. It's just an attitude you're trying to cultivate, but you can do it in the framework of a form of meditation, right? And you do it using your breath. It's just a way to anchor the thoughts, but the thoughts should be there all the time. Excuse me. So, okay, so you'd sit, okay, so what it is, simply speaking, technically, you'd visualize a person in front of you. And you start with a beloved. You start with your beloved child who's sick or something, you know, someone you adore. People spend years in this street doing all the beings of the universe, all the realms of existence, all the hell beings, gods, animals, enemies, friends, strangers, everybody, you know, doing this Tonglen. But you start with, say, a beloved. And then what you're doing, essentially, when you breathe in, you're imagining breathing, you're breathing off them, their suffering, you're breathing it in like yucky smoke. And you can, there's a multitude of ways of doing this, but you can visualize, for example, at your heart, like a little rock, and you can think of it as yourself cherishing. So you're breathing in their suffering, you're taking it off them, you're breathing it into yourself, and then you're thinking of it as chipping away at your self cherishing. And then when you breathe out, you're breathing out, giving them all your good qualities, your health, your wealth, your beauty, your merits, whatever you like. So you're wanting, in other words, the first one is the practice of compassion, which is, you know, may you not, so okay, may you not suffer, that's compassion. Okay, there's a few points here. May you not suffer, that's compassion. I think I talked about this last week. There's another crucial level, which is the unique characteristic of the compassion of the bodhisattva path, which is the one that's called great compassion, maha karuna, great compassion. So that's not only, oh my God, look at that suffering, but the next one is, what can I do to take it away? That's the universal compassion, as Holiness talks about it. It's the brave attitude of the bodhisattva path, where you cultivate this attitude that it's my job. It's like a mother. You know, I always use the example, you see a mother sees her kid drowning. She'll have incredible compassion. Oh my God, look at that suffering. But she doesn't look around wondering who's going to save her baby. Whether she can swim or not is not relevant. She's in that water. That's great compassion. It's my job. And you're trying to cultivate that as the bodhisattva. So that's there for sure. But this Tonglen is like a cream on the top. So not only are you saying, oh my God, look at that suffering. Not only are you saying, what can I do to help? But you're saying, you know what? Give it to me. I'd rather have the suffering and I'd rather you be happy. Some parents talk like that for their children. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? I remember a friend of mine in prison. It's very fascinating, very moving. A friend of mine in one of the prisons, years ago I met him, Richie, was a Mexican gangster, ex-gangster. And he started thinking, you know, I remember the very first time I met him, I always tell the story, I met him through letters. No, I met him. He started writing. He met a friend of mine, or another one in prison, and he wrote, and he told me he'd been a gangster all his life and killed several people, whatever. And now he had a life sentence in prison. And then he's now in the top security prisons, which is very common in California, many of the states, where they're in the cell 23 hours a day. And because the gang activity is quite strong in the prison. I think it's changing a bit now. Anyway, he told me that in the letter, he told me that he talked about meditation. He really enjoyed meditation. He liked Tara. They all like Tara. You know, they all love Tara, the Latinos, for some reason. Anyway, he said in the letter that he's very laid back, very relaxed. But when he gets angry, he gets very angry. You know, violent, very violent. So anyway, he wrote, and I went to visit him eventually, an 8-hour drive. I had a 2-hour meeting with him, the glass in between with the phones, you know. And I said, and there he was, covered in his tattoos, which is very common to all the Mexican gangsters. The black ones, I think, too. They're covered in their tats, you know, their tattoos. All over his face, his neck, everywhere. They have their gang names on their neck, you know. Because one of the commonest questions on the streets is, where are you from? Which means, which gang are you? So instead of being asked, you just have it on your throat. Anyway, there he was, covered in his tats. We call it in Australia tats. And I said, how are you today, Richie? And he said, he kind of blushed under his tattoos, and he said, well, I got really angry today, Robina, and I had a fight with my cellie, my cellmate. I had a fight with my cellie, and I put his head down the toilet. But then he said, like delighted, but Robina, I took it out again. Now, I could not believe this. I just love this story. If he was about murder somebody, he didn't murder his fourth guy. He stopped and he took the guy's head out of the toilet. I was very impressed. That's practice. Then he got the guy chucked out and he sat and did his Tara meditation. I was very moved by that. And that's the point. I mean, that practice, that's really sublime practice, you know. So moving. Anyway, the point is, a couple of years later, he wrote, because he had a lot of these guys have got HIV, not HIV, but got really like bad liver problems. Because they're living, some of these guys are living in these cells 23 hours a day for years and years and years, and they never see the light of day. They never see the air, never see the sun, never see nature. They're just in this false light. I mean, they get sick. They get really sick, you know. So he said that he'd had, not AIDS, maybe AIDS, HIV or something. Well, I can't remember, something. And then he wrote, and he was very sincere. He said, Robina, maybe I should decide not to accept the medicine I'm getting, and I should have the suffering, and I should die young, and then think I'm purifying all of my negative karma. What do you think about that? I mean, I was so moved by that, you know, incredible. Even the thought to consider that. But not only, in the same letter, he also said, when his people, my people, the Mexicans, he said, when my people come into prison, and all these young kids now think things are changing, but these young kids are tried as adults and they get sent into these monstrous, you know, adult prisons where there's gangs and violence all day. These young kids coming in, he said, my people, they come into prison, and he said, I wish I could take upon myself their sentence and they could leave the prison. I mean, even to have those thoughts, you know. Parents have it from their children. I was so moved by that. Even the thought of that is like atomic bomb on self-cherishing. Even the thought, I wish I could have that suffering. This is unbelievable, people. But people just see this monster. When I go to these prisons, you know, and the guards, I mean, they're like another gang, unfortunately. The loathing and disgust they would have for these gangsters, I can't tell you. It's all race-based as well. And I mean, I'd go to this particular prison, which is an 8-hour drive from San Francisco. I'd go and I'd have 2-hour meetings with these guys between blasts, you know. And it was very difficult because sometimes you'd get up there and then there was what they have a lockdown. The Mexicans were locked down because something went wrong. So you've got to drive 8 hours back with no meeting. Or you wear the wrong clothes. I can't describe it, so heavy. But also, they'd see me coming, and I'd come to visit different people. They'd see me in the system. They'd look at me with such derision. You can't believe it. And they wanted to know why I was coming to visit these different people. They're not family. They're boy. You know, and I said, I'm a Buddhist nun, and I paid to come to see them. One of them, he couldn't contain himself. He said, but they're animals. And you can't believe the loathing, the anger, you know. It's very shocking. I'm not just say everybody's like that. It was so heavy, you know. Anyway, whatever, that was years ago. So there's Richie, you know, happily wanting to take upon himself the suffering of these young Mexican boys who come into prison so they can release. It's incredible. So Tonglen is not only compassion, oh my God, look at the suffering. Not only what can I do, which is pretty incredible, but you know what? Give it to me. I'd rather have it. This is insane. For some reason in the West, people love it. It's very amazing. But people make a mistake. I think we misunderstand. First point is it's this. The aim is not, let's say your friend has a headache and you're trying to imagine taking upon yourself their headache. The aim is not to get a headache. This is one of the commonest misconceptions. The commonest question is, oh, but I shouldn't do it. I might get a headache. It's the opposite. It's the opposite. By you imagining taking upon yourself that person's headache, you just put atomic bombs on the suffering, you know. That's not the criterion of success at all. The second thing is, and this is really important, it is not a healing technique. This is not to heal the other person of their headache. It's got nothing to do with that. This is your personal practice, and you happen to be utilizing in your visualization this beloved friend or enemy, whoever it is out there, as a practice for you to smash your self-cherishing. That's the goal. It's not a healing technique. It's not to get a headache. It's ridiculous. It's you using this person in your meditation to give you the courage that if you could, you would rather have that suffering than them. It's an amazing practice. Just even Richie just saying those words in that letter is like an atomic bomb on self-cherishing, you know, and ego grasping. So incredibly powerful. It's your practice. And so, of course, you're training yourself. And eventually, like anything, if you keep training, you'll be able to do it. And that's why I have to finish now. That's why I'll always end with this story. I'm sure I've told it before. You might have heard it. The story about my friend Harry, a meditator. He's right now in Crestone, a few hours north of me in Colorado, with his partner, Mary. She's just started her 3-year retreat, but he's done years and years of retreats in the mountains, up in the caves, and, you know, in Nepal. He's a yogi. So he told me one time this story. I tell the story many times. He's a meditator, right? He's had a cave up in the mountains. He's been a serious yogi. And so practicing, training in all these meditations, right? So now this is what he just did was the proof of the pudding, I'll tell you. So there he was going up one time in Copan. He was getting ready to go up to his cave again, and he was packing his bag ready, his backpack, and getting ready to go. And then Lama Zopa said he had a dream that Harry would die and not to go. So this is a side note is Lama Zopa doesn't sleep, so it can't be a dream. This is obviously Lama Zopa's clairvoyance, which is a low-level realization for these high yogis, you know. So anyway, they couldn't get a message to Harry. Harry had left. And it must have been before cell phones, obviously. So then I heard this story later, and I asked Harry to verify the story. So he's going up there, and there's another person with him. She must have reported the story. So this particular normal road was closed off, you know. And I mean, I've led this trek up there to Lama Zopa's monastery, Laudo. It's about 7,000 meters. I don't know how many. I forget now. What is it? I forget how many thousand meters it is. I've been up there 2 or 3 times. I'd never walk up a mountain in my life. Never walked up hills. I don't walk things, period. I can't stand it. I walk around my table here. I'm living in Santa Fe, but I might as well be in retreat somewhere. I don't walk outside because you trip over gutters and rocks. I can't stand it. But I walk around my table about 2 kilometers a day, so I get exercise. And I do some prostrations. Anyway, that's enough for me. I don't care. So I thought I'd lead a trek up there to raise money for Lama Zopa's monastery and cave. It was a very intense experience walking up these mountains. Anyway, they're very intense. It's very treacherous as well. I nearly got knocked over by a yak down the mountain, but luckily someone saved me. Anyway, Harry was walking up this really treacherous path with his big pack on his back, 20 kilos, whatever. And suddenly, out of the blue, very quickly, this very narrow, really treacherous path, and they're really so treacherous, some are so narrow, this particular one, 3 Sherpas, 3 porters were coming down. Well, these porters, they carry 50, 60 kilos on their back. They're bent double. All they can see is their feet. It's so intense, you can't believe it. They're so kind. And it was really intense. Suddenly they appear, looming in front of him. No time to think. And he's had years and years of doing meditation. So his first thought, and he's not telling me to show off. It's powerful to tell these stories, He's trained himself in these meditations for years and years and years and years and years. So just like anything, if you train in tennis for years and years, you're going to be able to win Wimbledon, for God's sake. It's not surprising. He trained in meditation. So there he sees these 3 porters, and suddenly the first thought arises. 3 of them, 1 of me. So there's a whole meditation you do when you start to do the one of you're beginning earlier on when you talk about how others want to be happy just like me and others are more important than me. And you do all this analysis. So the 3 people is more than 1. I'm only 1. They're more important. I mean, ego doesn't like that at all. But that's his first thought. So he stepped to the side near the edge of the cliff to allow them to pass. And that was so quick and so intense. He then said to himself, if they knock me, I won't hold on. So they knocked him and he didn't hold on. So he said he was falling. His feet were on the ground. His pack is pulling him. He said, I had a psychic vision of the entire fall. I saw my body crash to the ground. And, I missed a crucial piece. When Lama Zopa said to send this message to Harry and they realized that Harry had gone, he then asked Geshe Lama Kontrog, this amazing yogi, I might have mentioned him to you, incredible holy being who spent years and years up in the mountains naked, no food, no sleep, in these little caves, As Lama Zopa said, he lived in Vajrayogini's Pure Land, the highest of yogis, you know. He was now living in Kopan after all these years in meditation. So Lama Zopa, when he heard that Harry had gone, he asked Geshe Lama Konchog to pray for Harry. That was it. So anyway, Harry didn't know about that. So Harry's falling off the mountain, not holding on to the Sherpas. And he's had a psychic vision of the entire fall. I saw my body crash to the ground. And then he said, I felt the hands of Geshe Lama Konchog very powerfully pushing me. So he reversed direction. He reversed direction and fell onto the path. So there's no way in the universe, is there, first of all, that you could even have the spontaneous thought, I will step to the side. There's no way, because instinct for survival, or as we call it in the West, but ego grasping, naturally puts me first. So you'd sit by the cliff and you'd hope they don't all fall off. And if they do fall off, I sort of not my fault. You'd be a bit sad. But there's no way in the world a normal person who hasn't trained for years would spontaneously put themselves in danger. Your babies, yes. These are three strangers, you know. And then not only would you say that, but you would not have the will. You wouldn't have the ability if you hadn't meditated for years, including having realized emptiness, to be able to say effortlessly, if they knock me, I won't hold on. I mean, think of that, people. That's the result of Tonglen and all these meditations. The actual experience of that. That's the proof of the pudding, you know. And it also happens to show the power of the great beings whose minds pervade the universe, who have become Buddhas, and who can manifest themselves wherever they're needed to do such things, you know. So I'll finish with that thought. All right, you people, sweetie pies. We dedicate. Don't put the prayers up. It's okay. Just delight thinking with these 2 hours, all this talking I've done. You didn't do much talking at all, you people. I've done the whole lot. Never mind. We think all these seeds have gone in. Maybe think about all these techniques. Maybe have the courage to be able to practice them step by step by step. So we can become exactly like this. This is our potential. So we can be a benefit to sentient beings. And the bonus on the way is your own joy. Never forget that. When you're like this level, when you meet Harry, he's hilariously funny all the time, totally joyful, totally happy, wonderful fellow, you know. So the bonus is you get happy, people. You're not left behind. Don't worry about it. We think of saints as like sad, miserable people. No, if you got this one, you've realized emptiness. You've got bliss. You are joyful. That's the bonus. Jangchub Semchog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Guching, Ke Panyampa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Pelba Shog. And may we never develop, even for a moment, wrong views towards the deeds of our most precious gurus. With faith and respect gained from seeing their goodness, may their full inspiration flow into our hearts. Okay, sweetie pies. Thank you very much, Talia.
Thank you, Venerable. I'll see you next week, and then we will chant our prayers for your long life and health. Off time.
We won't do that. You can do what you like.
Yes, on ourselves.
Okay, bye, darlings.
Bye.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.